This session is News as Investment. Before we start, I'd just like to introduce the panel to you. On my left is Rajeev Chandrashekhar. Rajeev is a second-term Member of Parliament in Rajya Sabha from Bengaluru, Karnataka. He is the Vice Chairman of the NDA in Kerala. In 1994, he set up one of India's largest mobile cellular networks, BPL Mobile. Currently, he is the non-executive chairman of Jupiter Capital, which today has investments and managed assets of over $1 billion USD, ranging from technology to transportation, logistical services to hospitality and entertainment. The media space, he has investments in Asianet News, Suvarna News 24/7, Kannada Prabha, Asianet Newsable, and most recently in Republic TV, which all of you may be aware of because that got a lot of publicity. Yeah. On my left in the far corner, Siddharth Yog. Siddharth is a global investor, a serial entrepreneur, and a philanthropist and business school professor. He's the founder of the Xander Group. It's one of the largest investment firms and not funds, as I was corrected yesterday by Siddharth. He is a faculty member at Harvard Business School, where he teaches a course on investing in emerging markets. He chairs Yuj Kutum, the Yog Family Foundation. He's a member of the President's Global Advisory Council at Harvard University, founder and member of the governing body of the non-profit Ashoka University in India, member of the Board of Trustees of the American Repertoire Theatre, is that how you pronounce it, Siddharth? And a member of Indian Advisory Council, Lincoln Center in New York. He's also an investor in Swaraj magazine, which has an online avatar now, as you're aware of. On my right is Bala Srinivasa. Bala is a partner at Kalari Capital. Most of you have heard that name. It finds its way in pink papers often. It's an early-stage tech-focused venture firm. Bala was previously part of management teams at two successful analytics startups where he ran the sales, marketing, and product management functions. His last firm, Amba Research, was acquired by Moody's in 2013. Also, Kalari has investments in Scoopwhoop, which is a content platform, which is now actually getting into news. On my immediate right is Siddharth Nautiyal. Siddharth is an investment partner at Omdiyar Network, where he leads the firm's emerging tech investments in India. Before joining Omdiyar Network, Siddharth was an entrepreneur, angel investor, and mentor to startup companies across Delhi, Bangalore, Mumbai, and Pune. He incubated and advised companies in ED Tech, that's EdTech, and home relocations, invested in financial technology, B2B, and consumer internet companies. Also, full disclosure, Omdiyar Network is our primary investor at newslaundry. So if I nod more vigorously in agreement with him, and I'm softer to him, you will know why. Thank you all for making time and joining us. This is a panel we hope to learn a lot from. And those of you who were here yesterday, I've repeated this on several panels. The idea of the Media Rumble is we have friends and, I won't say foes, but adversaries in arguments throughout panels yesterday and today. The idea is that news is facing a crisis the world over, and it is not because of any ideology. I think it's a combination of several things, especially technology. And how can we butt heads, exchange ideas, and maybe evolve systems that make it better for news as a product. So let me start with you, Rajeev. Newslaundry does its fair share in lampooning all channels, including Republic, as we do to everybody else. Let me just put this first question, and everybody can, take 4 minutes to give your piece on it. Why would a businessman invest in news? What is the rationale behind it? And then we take it from there.
Yeah, no, considering the love and affection I've received recently, that I've asked that question myself quite often. No, but look, I think how I got into media has been almost by fluke, because I'd invested in what was essentially an entertainment company in the South. And we grew that business, which is, the GEC sphere. It had a piece that was news embedded in it. So it was GEC with news. And so when we built that company over years and then we sold it, which is the business that I'm in, we sold it to a foreign company, and it turned out that the news piece they could not keep. So we spun off the news, and that's how I inherited investment in news. Now, the piece until the investment in Republic was very focused in the South. It was a niche play, and after acquiring this asset, we developed a strategy which was really about collecting micro brands and micro audiences. So pieces of Kerala, Karnataka, and then hopefully increase the footprint in other markets. So the logic was always create these smaller brands, smaller audiences, so that as an aggregate, they really cover a larger footprint. English then, of course, became a natural progression because in the South, English is the linked language, is the common language. If you ask me what is the financial rationale for it, I think there is a compelling financial rationale the way we look at it in terms of collecting these legacy brands which are in the traditional media space and then pivoting them, if you want to call that, into the media tech space. So that is our strategy, which is we collect these brands which are either small brands or they are smaller presence in small markets, and essentially recapitalize them, grow them, and turn them around to have a significant component of tech. Because I believe, and I don't know if everybody shares this, that the future is about the digital space for media, but there is an advantage for legacy brands that have legacy audiences and equity to be far more successful in the digital space than, let's say, something that's brand new. So that's the logic.
Yeah, I mean, the direct question, and again, just some quick background. So Kalari is a early stage tech-focused investor. So we've actually made 3 digital content investments. The direct question would be invest in a pure news startup today. I think it'd be very hard. But let me qualify that, very similar to what was said earlier. I think we are interested in investing in a vision of the digital media, or really the media company of the future in India, and that highly likely is going to be somebody who's heavily digital. Whether that is an existing brand that makes the leap, or it is an entrepreneur who has the vision to combine some form of news, entertainment, possibly even sports, into the kind of platform, you know, all the millennials of the future are going to be listening to, reading to, and hearing, you know, 10 years out is what we get paid to discover. So I actually believe there is a lot of opportunity. Actually, I've been very excited the last 2 days over here just to hear the breadth of views and passion people have about news and quality news. But I do think the part that I thought that was missing was a little bit of deliberation on the fact that things are changing all around you, and while it is terrific to have the moral compass straight, it's terrific to have the fact that, you know, you want to do the right thing, report the right news, build the right kind of organization. But I think the 2 sponsors you have here, Google and Facebook, are eating your lunch right around you, and there's got to be a better model by which you can go out and build that company of your dreams, and we are there to support that if there's one such company. So,
thanks, Bala. Sid.
I'll try and answer your question by putting 3 hats on, as an academic, as a philanthropic investor, and as a for-profit investor purely, because there could be different reasons for somebody to invest in news. As an academic, I would say this is an industry in deep transformation. Disruption is happening, whether it is because of the digital onslaught or because of the increase in population. And when you combine access with an increasing population, how it translates into being able to impact or inform elections or views of a large and diverse population, and with all the issues of the world that are coming to bear, I think it is a classic industry for innovation and therefore for investment. That would be the academic answer. As a philanthropic investor or as a impact investor, not necessarily philanthropic, I would say perhaps there are people who believe that a thriving democracy needs a free and independent media. And the only way you can keep something free and independent is that it should be self-sustaining. And if it's self-sustaining, that means that a return should not be a bad word. However, because of the nature of the business itself and because of the limitations, therefore, that come with it, because you cannot operate just purely for profit, you are wanting to keep and ensure your independence, Perhaps the way to think about investing in media is through what is called the double bottom line, right? You have the for-profit return, a minimum return, perhaps not as large as you would expect in a traditional business or as a traditional investment, but then you supplement that or add to that with the impact investment or the social good that you're producing, and there are ways and models to measure that, and there are lots of investors like Omidyar and others who are focused on that around the world, and one of my foundations, we try and do that as well. We want the business to be self-sustaining. That means it needs to generate a minimum financial return, but then it is also being measured in terms of the social impact that it might be providing, and in countries like India or other democracies around the world, that is a very fundamental social public good that is needed for the evolution of a democracy and for the health of a democracy. For a purely for-profit investor, which one could put that lens on, I think news and entertainment are merging. I noticed that you very significantly have asked about investment in news, not in entertainment. Unfortunately or fortunately, right, and I don't have any particular viewpoint on that, I think those two have merged. What you see on news today, I would call entertainment, pure and simple. I mean, you switch on channel to channel, and you know, I usually spend 5 minutes and I'm laughing and almost rolling on the floor, kind of seeing supposedly, you know, enlightened people debating. I really can't call it a debate because it's really such fun to watch. And of course, you're also getting some part of the news from that. But it's not news in the traditional sense of the word that we thought about news, right? And also the difference between, I think, the merging of news and editorialism. I think very few people understand that, you know, news should be on fact and editorials are editorials with a particular perception. The Economist is a magazine that I read very often and one of my favorite magazines. I mostly disagree with what they say, but I still read it because it's interesting, but it's an editorial view, it's not news. So I think that distinction, if one is able to make, and the fact that the lines between news and entertainment are blurring, so as a for-profit investor, I would think it's a very interesting place to be at, because that's where a large part of what the population wants is moving. So if you were simply thinking of which industry, what is a growth industry, a disrupted industry, and how can I generate profits from it, perhaps that could be one viewpoint. So those are the three views that I would have as for news as an investment in the current environment.
Siddharth, I know Omidyar has investments the world over. In fact, you're the only one on this panel whose fund has investments in Burma, which has a regime which is anything but democratic in the Philippines. So you have a perspective of where it gives returns and what is the fundamental reason that you put it in there. So could you just bring that perspective in as well?
So I'll start with an introduction to Omidyar, because that will feed into some of the answers that your question demands, Abhinandan. So Omidyar Network is a philanthropic investment firm. We've been, over the last 12 years, investing in companies with the sole idea of backing companies that use technology to cause impact and create impact at scale. We do that across multiple industry areas. But as we've done that, we've figured, and over the course of investing $1 billion over the last 12 years, we figured that different industries are at different stages of evolution. We call it investing across the return continuum. There are certain industries, certain companies where a clear commercial return is what drives our investment. Some parts of news are in that area, many are not. There are other areas where markets are still developing, where we cannot expect a commercial return, in fact, where we might actually have to seed that area by putting money in as a grant and expecting nothing back. There are certain other areas where they fall in the middle, where you might expect some capital back, but not really a commercial return. And there are different areas of news that are across these various areas of the return continuum. If I look at our portfolio, I think digital is really the way we believe news goes, which is the reason we're sitting here and having this discussion as well. Many reasons. One, it's a lot more personalized. Second, there's a lot more interactivity. That's what the customers want now, as opposed to a long-form content they read on paper. Third, the cost structures might actually be a lot more amenable to scale as well. But if I look at the contrast with these benefits, there is a risk as well. it's much more easier, if I must so say it, to game the system when it comes to digital news. You have the entire problem of fake news coming in, which it's difficult to control, and as a user, I have no idea whether something is true or not. As more and more people enter the space, there's the idea of where does the editorial freedom come in? Is the news that I'm reading unbiased? Or is there an angle to it that I don't know because of the ownership structure that that news outlet has? So if I look at our portfolio internationally, we've done a fair bit of work on the grant side. So we have we announced a $100 million fund in earlier this year with the entire idea of helping reduce the amount of fake news that floats around. Can we help certify? Can we help cut down the amount of fake news floating in the system? We've made investments. Again, the reason we are speaking here and the reason I have Abhinandan is winning brownie points with us, where we believe that news over time will get long-form news, which is really moving from the offline world to the digital world, where it'll over time develop a model which is sustainable, but it needs some time to get there. So there we're more than happy to come in expecting lower than commercial returns, which is really the bulk of our news portfolio globally as well right now. On the other extreme, we have investments in companies like Daily Hunt, where the reach and the engagement numbers are such that monetization is not an issue. And there we go in expecting that this will be a commercial return investment, where we compete with and collaborate with other VC firms and try to get the maximum return as a financial entity. So it's a long answer, but depending on which area we're looking at and the maturity, I think the ability to invest across that return continuum is what allows us to do work in this area. In the absence of that, if you just take a for-profit lens, I think the universe of what you can invest behind is a lot smaller than many other areas.
Thanks, Siddharth. Now, I'm just going to put a little context here, and then we just go back to the panel. We did have a session yesterday on the economic models of news. So we had Siddharth Vadrajan from The Wire, which is a Section 25 company. It's a not-for-profit. We had the Ken, whose founder is here as well, whose story a day, niche, tech, startup news. Subscription only, no ads. Newslaundry, no ads. We had Scroll, which has got huge reach, native advertising. Now, there are 2 or 3, points that I want to make, and then, I'll come back to Rajeev. What Siddharth said, and that was brought up yesterday also, what is news and what is content? Everything is content. And my own view was that news can never compete with Kim Kardashian breaking the internet. So if we get into that game, news will lose that game. You may win the economic battle, but you will lose the news battle. On the other hand, for it to be sustainable and this new platform, converging everything, is that inevitable? So that is one, just putting it out there, Second thing, when we were raising money for Newslaundry, I pitched to several VCs, some traditional VCs. And no disrespect meant, everyone comes from their own point of view. They said, there's a great idea, you have some great people, now can you launch this in 5 languages? I said, I can get Madhu Trehun who speaks Telugu. There's a lifetime of credibility that has been built, which we are bringing. But he was dead serious, and I know people who have said, yeah, we'll do that, let's have the money, and they've gone ahead. So that, just putting it out there, which doesn't help news. And third, Rajeev, rather unfairly to you, but since you are here, and we want to engage, no disrespect or offense meant, what you touched upon about, getting smaller audiences and then monetizing them. So it's a vehicle for monetizing something else. News is not there for its own sake. Now the danger in that is someone who has varied interests, whether it's political, you're a politician as well, you have interests in other industries. And that is one of the biggest criticism of Indian news, that Indian industrialists don't invest in news because they want to invest in news. That's their marketing budget or their lobbying budget for their other stuff. And that's been, everyone's been accused of that. We get accusation that, oh, their network caused a coup in Ukraine. You did? Don't say yeah then. Because then you said that's what they're doing with, Pierre Omdiar wants to come in from this way or that way. So how do you kind of battle that? Because that is a real danger. I personally don't think Reliance is investing in news because they love news. It is, whether to sell more mobile phones or Jio or whatever. So these three things, could you tackle each of these problems? Because on one hand, it could be a problem for the economics, on the other hand, for the product.
Let me start with the last one, this issue of the corporatization of news, if you want to call it that. Look, I'm being pretty upfront and plain. I don't want to make a contrived argument about me doing this for transforming the nation and all of that. So that's not what I look at. Fundamentally, this is my philosophy, that everything that you invest capital in must be run with a clear motive and outcome. And there has to be rigor and discipline around that outcome. That's my philosophy, if you want to call it that. And profitability is the best way, as I see it, and I have some years of experience in this, of keeping a company pretty focused on what it is supposed to do. Number one. Number two, I don't necessarily think this corporatization thing, and I just want to make this point out there for you, is a recent phenomenon. I know that recently people have got a bit into a twist about new channels launching and whether this is a corporate-backed channel, blah, blah, blah. But if you look at Time Warner and AT&T, you look at TCI, you look at CNBC, you look at Al Jazeera, you look at all of these large networks, they all have an enterprise-ness to it. Now, you also have a BBC, but that's fine. That is an historic legacy, NPR-like model that is being funded by the taxpayers or the radio license players of UK.
It hasn't worked anywhere except the UK.
Yeah, exactly. And that is because it's, like I said, it's a legacy situation. So I don't think this issue of corporate ownership of a media franchise or a media platform is something unique to India, or it is very recent. So that point I just wanted to make. The third, this issue of whether having a profit motive compromises the content that a media channel puts out. And let me explain this to you in very simple, clear terms. If an investor invests in a media product or a media company, whether it's Newslaundry or Asianet News or Republic or anything, he looks for returns. The return in media is a combination of course, the financial returns. But the financial returns only come when you have an audience and ratings. And the audience and rating only comes when you have a credible brand and credible content. So to assume for a minute that you can have a corporate-owned channel that is spewing out propaganda or spewing out biased content, and it can create audiences and it can create the financial advertising revenue, is a bit, I haven't seen that happen anywhere. Unless it's a loss-making company that's been constantly bailed out by its parent corporate. But if it is a profitable company, it automatically implies that it has an audience. The audience is being monetized through and by attracting advertising. And that is only happening because it's got a content that the audience appreciates.
Just a second.
Yeah, go ahead.
And you can carry on after this. That's actually the problem, because at least in the broadcast space, there were no profitable companies other than, I think, Z. So it wasn't working. So which is why I'm saying the reason was, and the second part, I agree, it's not unique. I just think now the awareness is more, so people like you are accused a lot more of having an agenda. But it's always been there. But I'm saying, is that a problem? Whether it's been there or not is not what I'm saying.
I think if you have to define a problem here, it is that media is not profitable enough to attract a larger, broad-based group of investors. And therefore, the default always happens to go into the impact investment mode. That this is some kind of an NGO grant-driven activity. I don't think news has to be that. There are enough parallels and enough examples all over the world where news is profitable. That's the point I'm trying to make, that we have to get out of this mindset that news inherently is not profitable, and therefore, for some reason, to have good news, you have to have an alternate model that depends only on impact investing. And I'm not trashing impact investing. I think they play a role, and I think, we've seen NPR in the US, you've seen other products that go out there and do the job. But to assume that news should only depend on that is very, very, in my opinion, dangerous. Because what you want is public markets to play a role in this. You want investors to play a role in this. And for that, media has to be, and news has to be profitable.
One way to answer the question about news is to fundamentally step back a little bit. Let me step back and come back in, right? So, you know, at a very base level, 2 or 3 different things are going on which we have to take into account to answer the question. First is, what is technology really doing to the business? It's not just the economics. It is technology, whether it's your mobile phone or it's social media, which we even talked about from the Lutyens panel that was there, fundamentally changes the way people choose to communicate, the way they want to read, the way they want to listen, and that basically changes the model of distribution. It changes the model of distribution. It also changes the model of content, the content format, how people want to, you know, see and read stuff, right? And if you take this, you know, stepping away and look at just the US for a minute, and I know India is different, but it can't be different forever, is at least our belief. If you look at the US, it's going to be very hard to make out in 5 years who is a telecom company, who is a media house, and who is a news organization. And this change is being driven purely by technology, right? So if someone like an NBC just is invested in BuzzFeed, which you could have foo-fooed as a, hey, social media, entertainment, whatever, right? At the same time, Verizon goes and buys Yahoo. On the other hand, Axel Springer buys Business Insider, who, by the way, is a very interesting example of what is possible if you think about profitability for a minute, right? Now, if you're the Financial Times, you pretty much spit at Business Insider and say, hey, you know, what is this stuff even, right? But the guy's got 76 million monthly active users, and he sold his company for $390 million. I leave it to you whether you judge it to be a large number or a small number. But my point is, going forward, I don't think the concept of standing on a mountain and waving the flag of, I am this, you know, moralistic news organization that does things by the book, without taking heed of the world around me, is going to fly. And whether it is by reinventing a distribution channel, right? And I'm not picking on News Laundry, I'm just saying, News Laundry might want to say, hey, I'm going to find a way to distribute my news just through WhatsApp, and I'm going to pretty much hit 500 million Indians. That solves my distribution problem, right? Or it is a way in which you find yourself as part of every mobile phone. But somehow content and distribution is a double variable that you're going to have to solve and make money in the process. And which is why I don't think news alone, which is actually okay when you're starting out, but if you want to build a larger business, and you really want to build a larger business, because if you want to shepherd the next generation of unbiased news in India, I think you have an obligation to build a standalone profitable business that can run on its own 2 feet. So I think there's a fair amount of innovation is not just in technology, innovation is in business model and finding a way to work in the way the world around you is changing, is the way I'd put it.
Siddharth, and also you could just touch upon if everything is entertainment, then can news survive in that environment?
Look, I think I agree with what Rajeev says. You have to be clear about what you're doing, right, and why you're doing it. So that's the first starting point. Second, there are audiences. Audiences for every CNN, there will be a Fox News, right? Should CNN also aim to try and have the Fox News viewer as their viewer, right? Maybe, maybe not. What's wrong in it, right? As long as they are espousing whatever they believe is the right platform or the right views, and they have an audience, I don't think there is anything wrong in subscribing to an editorial view at all, right? In fact, you need multiple editorial views to have a functioning democracy, because if you only had one narrative, which is what we've had, by the way, in this country for many years, it's not a healthy functioning democracy. So you may not agree with the viewpoint, but it's important to have different views around the table. The second view that he said about corporatization. Look, I mean, since the Boston Globe has been part of this, event, let me just say, in 1993, the New York Times bought the Boston Globe for $1.1 billion. 20 years later, in 2013, the Boston Globe was sold to an individual, the owner of the Boston Red Sox, for $70 million. Okay? Now you can say it's one of the great newspapers of the world, award-winning teams, great news stories, but there's something fundamentally broken in that model. Or something needs to be fixed. Or somebody needs to decide at that point that this is who we want to be and this is how we're going to do it. The Economist is owned by the Rothschild family and the Agnelli family. New York Times is owned by Carlos Slim, right? So corporatization of media, as Rajeev said, is not new. And one of the things that we see in India is people, you know, especially journalists, and forgive me for saying this at a media forum, sneering down at business and corporates. Oh, we are independent, right? Well, I'll tell you what's happening. Power and privilege is being replaced by IRRs and multiples. Learn to live with it. And that is the way of the world. The second point that I think is important here is that if you choose to be XYZ space, if you want to be completely disregarding whatever, you know, IRRs, or multiples, or returns, or sustainability you need, blog. It's easy. You know, news has been, the reason that the transformation that is happening is that people controlled what people heard. Right? So a group of individuals, journalists, newscasters, broadcasters, whatever you choose to call them, controlled what the rest of the population around the world in any country heard.
They still do, they're just more of them.
It's less so. Because people, as the last panel said, Narendra Modi found a way to communicate his message directly to the people. A Trump, you may agree or disagree with his views, found a way to communicate directly with people who supposedly didn't exist. Right? And that is what is happening. So news by itself is becoming a little redundant, and news needs to find a way to get its mojo back. And, you know, part of that might be to look at different business models, part of that might be to kind of understand what audiences you're appealing to, and part of it might be just stop sneering at other people.
Okay, and Siddharth, you've again had experiences all over the world. I know Rappler has done very well in the Philippines. For those of you who don't know, it's one of Omdia's investments, and I've met the lady who's the founder. She's what, 50? She's a super energetic lady who always seems to be on cocaine, Rappler. And her product became the #3 product. I mean, it destroyed established, corporatized news platforms. And it was her and her team of 25 young, energetic youth. So you've seen that happen, and that's not very editorialized. Talk about that experience, and again, does the market have all the answers? And, you know, we'll open this up to the, you know, audience after this, but before that, I'll just have one more question for Siddharth, but yeah, the other Siddharth, but this Siddharth go first.
Sure. So Rappler is an investment we made in the Philippines. So like Abhinandan says, they've done a good job. They've done a good job in figuring out multiple revenue sources. Though I will point out that the good job is in the context of what we went in expecting versus what a VC might consider a good job. So despite the good job, I think it still remains a company which is from our let's expect less than market returns portfolio. What they've done a great job of is building towards sustainability. So instead of just expecting display or native ads to give them revenue, they've expanded that to get events and analytics and people who now have specialized content available on them, and they monetize all of that. They're ahead of expectations. And I think what we need to do is, even as we look at what's happening in India, is figure out how do we expand the ability to monetize for early sites, news organizations in India as well. I want to react to what Rajeev said, and I'll tell you why that's important. So Rajeev mentioned that news has to be sustainable and profitable. Frankly, in India, look around us. There are tons of extremely profitable news companies. Look at Times of India, look at the Jagran, the Bhaskar Group. These are like spewing cash. Where the issue is that some of the younger companies who are more online based, we haven't yet figured what model it is that will allow us to get there. Rappler provides a way. It shows some way of what can be done to get there. But it's still early days because the monetization side on display and native advertising is still very new. The CPMs in India are 1/10 of what you get in the US. Subscription revenues, which are half of the online revenue that NYT makes today, are non-existent. So the challenges we face here are closer to Philippines than to the US. So I guess as over the next few years, we figure out what it is that makes these businesses sustainable. That's really the answer we have to be getting. CPMs are not changing overnight, but what revenue sources do we get on to make it sustainable, to retain the independence that we all value? I think that's critical for us.
Siddharth, if I could just... Sorry? No. So, because I have my kurta pajama and my Samsonite jhola to prove that, correct me if I'm wrong, but what I heard was that the market has the solution to the problem, in the sense that, rate of returns and stuff. Now, I personally believe the market is fantastic for price discovery and optimize usage of resources. But in stuff like justice, water, news, things that are existential, the market cannot provide a solution. So just on that, would you want to clarify that? Yeah, Rajeev, you can go, and then Sid, you can go.
I was wearing a kurta pajama last night at dinner.
But you didn't have a jhola.
So this view of you have to be this or that is so old-fashioned and outdated, frankly, right? And I can be everything and nothing, right? I can be left of center socially and right of center economically. I can be right of center socially and left of center economically. I could be anything, and I don't have to. Why should I have to subscribe to a particular view on a particular sort of cross on the divide on every aspect? To
I'm saying in news, what I heard is, the rate of return logic is, can the market...
it does so in education, it does so in healthcare, and I don't think...
You have experience with Ashoka.
Ashoka is a very different model. Ashoka is a purely philanthropic venture. But even at Ashoka, our fundamental... We are not looking for a rate of return. Every founder of Ashoka, and now there are over 100, has put in money into Ashoka and it's done. We will never get a return from it, except hopefully seeing Ashoka as a brand and as a university deliver quality liberal education. And it's not an education in liberalism, by the way. It's a liberal education, which are two very different things. We're teaching people how to ask questions, not what questions to ask. So there's a big differentiation in that, right? But Ashoka also needs to be self-sustaining. It is not, we are not looking to keep on putting money into Ashoka. Ashoka at some point needs to turn into a self-sustaining entity, and by the way, which should be run by alumni. All of the founders have said this openly, that our hope is in 10, 15 years, we can all step away, and this becomes an internally managed company. But it still has to be self-sustaining. So I don't necessarily understand the question that you're asking me, because that is also a market model. Ashoka wouldn't survive as a university for a minute, right, if it couldn't deliver a quality education, if it didn't subscribe to a particular viewpoint. It's a liberal education and basic sciences. And if it didn't try to make sure, and by the way, Ashoka already gives 40% fellowships. 40% of the students that are at Ashoka are on fellowship already. But the aspiration is that it needs to be a self-sustaining enterprise where anybody, irrespective of their economic background, can come and get a quality liberal education without compromising on the integrity of the institution and without compromising on the quality. So it's possible. Now, there are for-profit institutions as well, right? There are any number of medical institutions, some that you might know better than I do, but they are for-profit institutions. Are they able to deliver healthcare? Now, if a doctor was asked, should you be performing 8 surgeries? Should you be performing 10? If the person can't pay, should I perform the surgery or not? They will be in direct conflict with the administration of the hotel.
Is Dr. Trehan in the crowd?
I don't know what the solution to that is, but I think healthcare has been trying to find a solution to it. They may not have got there, but I think they are trying. Right? So I do think it's possible to do it. Markets are efficient. They're not perfect. But over the long term, I think markets, and there are all kinds of markets, by the way. There is not just a crass commercial market necessarily. I think markets find a way to make or break businesses, enterprises, initiatives, whatever you may choose to call them. And if you don't respect the market, you're not respecting your audience.
So, Akhi Das from Facebook is nodding vigorously in agreement with you. Rajeev.
So I just want to make 3 points, and they're all kind of linked. The first point, I think you're mixing up, when you say markets and content, you seem to be suggesting that the market is not a solution for the purity of news. That's what you're making.
That's what I'm saying.
And you are automatically assuming that the market will be affecting the purity of news. The corollary of that is that if you go to the market, somehow it compromises the ability of an organization to deliver news. That's your contention.
Structured in the digital space.
I think that is the gap. You are so suspicious of anything that's private. No disrespect again, that anything that is market will automatically impact the purity of the news. Now let's just go back to the last 12 years. And let's assume for a minute that things were very pure in the last 12 years. All of the critical issues that faced up to us today, you look at 2G, you look at issues like Aadhaar and privacy, you look at the other scams, you look at, for example, at the urban local body level, the rampant corruption. And you will see that the media has not been responding regardless of whether there was market or no market. And as a matter of fact, I would argue that there has been this problem of quality media anyway because of a lack of competition. People have gotten so comfortable with their monopolies on the duopolies, whether it's Times of India or Hindustan Times in Delhi or Deccan Herald or whoever in the south, that essentially these problems are no longer, the content that these platforms put out are no longer what the audience wants. And so that has, in a lot of ways, in my opinion, created this reaction of more and more of online entities trying to address this issue of saying, let's give alternate news. So I just want to make that point, generally wanted to make that point. The second point is about this thing about the future of Indian media. And I think you mentioned how Times of India and the other people are already profitable. And that's precisely the point. In the next 2 to 3 years, as I see it, and I'm not being some crystal ball visionary here, these large entities are going to be replaced by a large number of niche players. And while an integrated, sort of vertically, horizontally integrated media platform like Times of India or India Times today is easier to monetize because they have the eyeballs and the traffic, when that splinters or morphs into 2,000 niche players, how does that pie of advertising transfer to these 2,000 players is the challenge. That has nothing to do with markets or no markets. It is really an issue of how this media market or the media industry is going to transform from these large monoliths that are dominating and taking a large percentage of the advertising pie
to a small
into
fragmented
smaller
market.
And how will they attract this when there are hundreds and thousands of them?
Okay, we'll just take questions, but before that, I just had one pushback, Rajeev. I don't think I was suggesting that the last 10 years were perfect for the media. That's exactly the point I'm making. I think there's something significantly wrong with broadcast television today. Is it an improvement over 1994? Yes, it is. When I was in class 4 and Indira Gandhi was assassinated, in my view, all over the country, there was a lady lying in the state funeral and people were crying and nothing was happening. Okay? There were people being burnt on the streets of Delhi. I didn't know. What has happened today is great. I think it is better that people are shouting that XYZ has happened, but it's better than not knowing what's happening. But what I'm suggesting is that this is not the final frontier. This is not why. So the last 12 years is not an example. I'm saying we should go back to that. All I'm saying is there's serious flaws here, and can we move forward from there? Okay, questions? Okay, the young man in the green shirt.
I have a quick question for Mr. Chandrasekhar. When a channel is heavily dependent on individual stardom, now that you've seen some numbers come in, what do the numbers look like for Republic minus the debate? And of course, I assume the numbers on the debate are higher. So for the rest of the day, are the numbers as strong as a channel, or is it entirely dependent on an individual? Let
me give you my understanding, and I'm not particularly responding for Republic, but most broadcasting platforms today end up monetizing a few hours of the entire inventory. The rest of the inventory is really being sold off at cost or discounts. It is depending on where you get sort of coalesce your audience, those 2-3 hours in a day are what you're really selling and really making money on. So if you are really doing well at that prime time, super prime time, mega super prime time, or whatever the brand is, you will then charge a premium over your rack rate. If you are not, then you are closer to the rack rate. So it depends on different people, but pretty much across at least my investments, and I've studied most listed companies, the money making is restricted to that slot.
Okay, you have a question, and after that, we'll take one from this side. Yeah.
Just on that point, when just looking at how you chose to do things at Republic, most of your audience, if we look at the numbers and what the media buyers tell us, is a pretty high-end English-speaking audience. That's the art. The audience at Republic is an affluent English-speaking audience, most of which either has mobile data already or will have it very soon. Given this, why did you choose to invest in a broadcast license, take all the fixed cost of running this 24-hour programming? Isn't the logical structure for something like Republic 5 or 10 people, Arnab and a support team in a basement, small studio, capital light, and just broadcasting via the web? Is it the fact that media buyers are still irrationally attached to television advertising and you're not confident you can monetize sort of advertising time as well digitally? Because everything you're saying would suggest that that's the optimal structure for Republic. Yet when you set up Republic, you frankly took a very conventional, and if I were to take what you're saying to its logical conclusion, antiquated business structure for Republic.
No, so let me answer on that, since you've asked me over that. It was never meant to be, and I never invested in something that was a broadcast product. It was always meant to be a media tech company. It was about starting as a broadcast company, but very quickly moving to a digital platform, and where the broadcast content is also made available. But the platform is the real audience expansion platform. The broadcast platform has what it has, 48%, 44%, depending on whose numbers you want to believe. But the digital platform is really our expansion platform.
Bala had something to say.
Just one comment on what you said. I think just based on the numbers that we see, right? So today, if you look at a mobile, if you're a company that's coming out with a news or a content platform on just a mobile type of delivery mechanism, your reach, just based on the number of English-speaking users, let's just take English for a minute, TV is about 6x in terms of coverage. And what I mean by that is there are 267 million families. If you go talk to a brand that wants to reach a particular TG, right, you will generally find that television in general, right, reaches 6x more all the TGs that brands care about today versus a pure, internet-based mechanism. And we can take it offline if you like in terms of the data. But the real interesting point to where you're going is, if you're somebody starting new today, I'm not going to comment on the Republic since I don't know it, it is very much the way you want to go. So if you're a new news company, or you're a new media company that's going out, I think the opportunity over the next 10 years is very different than the barriers you see right now, and you have a real chance to actually be where brands want you to be with the kind of TG access you have at significantly lower costs, which changes the entire profit model, which goes back to what the market can possibly offer.
Okay, we have time for one last question, please, here. I'm sorry, after that I just have to wind up.
My name is Dipali Srivastav. I'm a freelance writer. All of you as investors have made the point that, get on with it. Corporatization of news is a worldwide phenomenon, and it's going to increase as technology and telecom and news entertainment all continue to merge. I think the questions that have been raised or the issues that have been raised in some of the other panels have been the weak institutions in the US, which get compromised in India compared with, say, the US, which are at risk when this happens. So, for example, judiciary not being held accountable because of contempt of court, as Hartosh pointed out, or government, taxmen's raids on proprietor's office if it's perceived as anti-establishment. So, as investors, what's your view on the strength of Indian institutions and whether they can withstand this kind of corporatization.
I get what you're saying. They exist in the context, but I think maybe Sid and our representative from ON would be best placed because you guys coexist in both countries.
So I think if you look at each institution and compare strength across India and the US, I mean, not for me to make a comparison across whether India is stronger or the US is stronger, but the data would suggest, though, that if you look at the amount of capital flowing into India, there's a fair bit of trust with what the institutions in India offer as protection for capital. So at the margin, I'm sure there are improvements. There are lots of things that Omedia Network is working on to make sure we can contribute to helping some of these things become stronger. But as a rule, I think it's perfectly okay, and the capital is voting with its feet, saying it is okay.
No, so I think that is a very good question. When a corporate invests in news, and in the background of fake news and other interests that can creep into that, what is the institutional checks and measures? I'm assuming that's your question, isn't it? Yeah, and therefore in the US, CNN can go against the president, but AT&T will not be able to do too much to Time Warner. So I think there is a system of checks and balances there, whether it's the FCC, whether it's whatever, institution. And I think that is a good point, that instead of us knocking private capital flowing into media and demonizing that as some sort of Martian invasion of this pure land of media, what we should be focused on is creating the institutional framework that ensures that this investment can never be misused. And that is precisely what you're saying. And I think the debate should move there. The discussion should move there. Is the telecom regulator adequately looking at things that to do with the integration between a telecom provider and a media entity? Is we talk about the fact that media can't be regulated in this country because, they just can't be regulated. But then if there is a problem in media, who will regulate it? Is it only that you get trolled on Twitter, or is there another alternate solution for it? So I think that is where this discussion should go. I strongly believe that there is a need to do that. Otherwise, the good and the bad get lumped in the same category. And you will have essentially the same status quoist aversion to private capital. And investors will turn around and say, look, why should we get into this? Because it's such a headache. So I genuinely believe that we need institutional development in this country that looks at this particular issue of media being regulated, not necessarily for their content, but from the point of view of the fact that their conduct does not represent something that is, bad.
Let me ask you, every media company, every news company is set up by someone. So they're better than anybody else? Their money is cleaner than everybody else's money? So when you talk about corporatization, what do you even mean? So Abhinandan set up News Laundry along with Madhu. Their money is cleaner than mine if I choose to invest with news or with somebody else. What is the differentiation? And if you're suggesting that all news outlets should be completely not-for-profit and should be funded by the state, I have nothing more to say, because we've seen how that works out.
We don't know the full truth about the Ambani group, right? So that is what I mean about corporatization. I don't mean small investors. I don't mean private capital in general. I'm talking about big
potential conflicts of interest.
For every Mukesh Ambani who's investing in perhaps every news house, you have an Abhinandan Sekhri who's trying to set up News Laundry, or has set up very successfully. And we're all here, aren't we? So I don't think it's a question of this or that. Both can coexist. And I would agree with Rajeev. Don't blame the lack of institutional frameworks and the institutions that have been systematically hacked away over the last 70 years for private capital flowing to media or to other sectors.
Or in not the most efficient way, basically. Yeah. So first of all, thank you all for coming. The idea of this is that we can engage and keep evolving the system to a better and better end. Thank you so much, Rajeev, for coming. We have often reported on you, and I really appreciate you coming and engaging with us in dialogue. And thank you, Siddharth and Bala. And thank you all.